What's up, you absolutely wonderful Magento loving friends of mine? Joseph here with another weekly practice test question and answer. We're going to be diving into what I consider, or continue our conversation about what I consider to be the absolute core necessities to customizing and fixing bugs in the Magento checkout. A couple weeks ago, we asked the question, what do you want to hear more about? Well, number one on that list, far and above number one, was checkout. And this conversation here is conversations that I am having. My goal is to point you in the right direction for approximately 60% of the knowledge that you need in order to effectively, and I think it's probably more than that, but to effectively understand how to fix bugs and customize more enjoyably the Magento checkout. All that to say, let's jump into our practice test question. How about that? All right, let's take a look. You have created a shipping email field that is shown directly above the shipping method field. So email field versus method field. However, this field must only be displayed if the shipping country is in the United States. Question: how do you make a UI component dependent on a value in the quote address? Okay, so how do we do this? I want to call out quickly that practice test questions don't always encourage the best behavior. And this is a great example. If I was architecting out this functionality, I would definitely not just say, hey, hard code in United States. Why? Because maybe in 6 months, France will be added to this list. And another couple of months, UK and Germany and India, whatever. The answer, this question is slightly flawed from an architectural perspective, but it gets the point across, and it's much easier to communicate. So I say that to point out that the question writers sometimes make sacrifices as far as best practices in order to get the point across as succinctly as possible. So let's take a look at the answers. We have 3 answers as always. Let's see what they say. Number 1, use the listens object to associate an observable's value with the quote data. B, use layout XML to add an export property to the quote. And C, use the window.checkout data object to provide a common connection point. So, which one is correct? Hopefully you have already answered this question and you're coming back to review and see if your knowledge is correct, or feel free to challenge me. I always like the challenges. Would you do this differently in these 3 options, or even outside of these 3 options? I always welcome that type of feedback. So let's take a look at the first option. Use the listens object to associate an observable's value with a quote data. Now, Magento has several different types of linking property tools. So exports, imports, links, and listens. Now, the listens property here is specifically talked about here, and I'll put the information here in the comments so you can review this documentation here later. UI elements at the same time here. UI element the listens as well from Alan Storm. Really, really great articles. So the idea is we have this other property out there somewhere, and when that property changes, the observable for that changes, it calls visibility changed or whatever method we want here for our property. Here's the issue. On the quote data, we have a country from the country selector, and we need like a mapping mechanism. Basically, does this country fit within this list? Right now, it's just US, but does it fit within this list of countries? And if it does, then we need to mark our visibility as true or false based off of whether it's found in array here. So in this case, the quote data is available via this mechanism, and we could use the listens object. This sounds very promising of an answer to me, but let's not jump to any conclusions, and let's go on to the next one here. Use layout XML to add an export property to the quote. This one sounds very promising as well. For example, and I'm gonna pull from the admin UI components, which, as I like to tell people, admin UI components are literally putting lipstick on a pig. And I'm not meaning that any further than just using that idiom there, because I've heard plenty of negative publicity about UI components. So people might say it has a little more application than just what I intended there. But That's all these UI component XML files are. So take a look here. We have our checkout index, which is what looks like absolute barf vomit all over the page of XML. I mean, it's just, I mean, scroll up and down. It's like, what in the world is happening here? It doesn't make any sense. So then we come over here. Here is a admin UI component. And this looks obviously much more clean. It's like, why didn't you do that like this, Magento? Well, the reason is very simple. Magento, or the admin UI components, fit into kind of these general buckets, whereas the checkout UI component, there's like a UI component for everything. So you can't really like boil it down, and which is presents another problem because so many developers just think the only customizations, the only things I can do in the admin is just literally limited to what I can do with the UI components. Like, okay, do you want a grid? Okay, here's the grid. Do you want a form? Here's a form. Okay, well that's okay. Maybe I can put an accordion. That's your imagination is your limit in the Magento admin UI. It's just that the front end makes that a little more obvious. Front end checkout makes it more obvious than the back end admin UI. So let's take a look here. We see some values. I'm going to search for import. Okay, so we have imports. Link is visible. So basically, we are using the imports here. We can do this via layout XML, so we could use like an export. I don't know if there's one on here. Nope, there's export button, but that doesn't helpful. So this is kind of the idea. We can use like a layout component, or we can use our layout XML. So we could just create we can create a how do I say this? Extension to our layout XML. And for example, we have our shipping step component is UI component, so it's basically a vanilla. But in here, we can specify our export property for the quote data, etc. Except that there's a major problem, even if this was available to be done for quote data. And I am not aware that this is available here in layout XML. I have not seen this available in layout XML. The next problem we would have is there is no mapping mechanism with the export feature. So it just transports data raw from one side to another component. That's all it does. So I don't see how I can make B work based off of the criteria, the restrictions that have been placed here. That's unfortunate. So otherwise, it would be a very interesting way to do this. And finally, C, use the window checkout data object to provide a common connection point. It'd help if I don't hit the wrong button on my mouse while I'm doing that. All right, so we've kind of already talked about this, but people do it. Windows should never, ever use checkout data for data storage, period. We run into the problem of synchronizing data. When we can literally hook up to an observable, basically data just flows through that. And it's such a different paradigm to wrap our minds around. And we'll be talking about that here in the future. But you have to do it. You absolutely have to do it. It's really critical for this. And so ultimately, all that to say, you can kind of see on the screen back here, this is the answer I would select in this case. So what would you do? Would you select this same answer? Would you select a different answer? And why? Remember, why is far more important than the answer that you chose. It's the reasoning that went into making that selection. Take care. Have a wonderful week, and I'll be back at you with some more checkout goodies for you here next week.